Well, hi everyone, and welcome to this week's weekly reflection from Salisbury Cathedral with me, Pete. I'm the minor canon for young people here at Salisbury Cathedral, and this week has been quite an enormous week as we've seen global tensions at an all-time high in recent years, anyway, and as we've seen Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and this is something that's been hugely complicated and very contentious and very difficult for us all to work through and witness and see and think about our response as individuals and corporately. It's also been the start of Lent, which is actually today, Ash Wednesday, as I'm speaking and recording this on Wednesday. Ash Wednesday, and I think the two sort of mould together ever so slightly in terms of, I don't know about you, but I felt quite hopeless and helpless with the Ukraine situation, not really quite knowing what to do. Yes, we've seen fantastic protests and a prayer event at the cathedral, but really not knowing what to do and how I can impact the situation. And I think Lent sort of ties into that, as it's this period of reflection, looking towards Easter, mirroring the 40 days in the wilderness of Jesus, where we get a chance to think about the mistakes of the world, mistakes we've made, where we can lament those things, and that we can try to reflect personally on our own discipleship journey and on what we can do. And as I thought about this whole week in Lent this year, and the phrase that came to me was the phrase intentional interruption, because I think for me that sums up Lent. Whether you're giving something up, whether you are picking something up, such as acts of generosity or anything else, or a book or whatever else to study your way through Lent, we are intentionally interrupting the patterns of our normal lives. I had this picture come to me, and you may have seen the program, but I had this picture come to me of Total Wipeout, a program which had obstacles above basically a swimming pool where contestants would run and charge across things, and a lot of the time they'd be falling flat on their faces and slipping or bouncing or flying into the water below. And it seemed to me this was sort of a metaphor for life. Often we can feel like we're running, feel like we're going at 100 miles an hour, and really we're not. We're just keeping on going, and then all of a sudden something can trip us up, something we slip, and we find ourselves bouncing out of control and slipping into the water, then having to pick ourselves back up again to keep going. And I think this sense of intentional interruption is something that's so important as we consider our journey through life, and as we consider Lent, and as we consider our actions within the world and personally at the moment. We need to intentionally interrupt ourselves with different actions so that we can start to reflect and to pause and to journey in the paths of God. It was fascinating to me, actually, when I did a little bit of research around Total Wipeout, that game show, that the first person, they've got these big balls, 4 balls like this, and they're massive, and you can stand on them. You have to bounce from one to the other, across the other side. And the first person to ever pass the big test of these big red balls was the person who stopped on each ball, who jumped, went down on all fours, stopped, paused, regrouped, went again, stopped, paused, regrouped, went again, stopped, paused, regrouped, went again. And it's that sense that we can charge through life, but actually when we intentionally interrupt ourselves, there is a sense that we can find new focus, new revelation, and new belonging and new being, where we can pray for the things of the world, where we can pray for our own journey and our own discipleship, and the way in which we are journeying towards Easter, particularly when we think about this time of Lent. Now, people often say to me, "Oh, well, it's sort of okay, but I sort of I sort of just go through life. It doesn't matter too much. Like, I don't need to stop." And I wonder, how many times have we found ourselves missing the moment? Maybe, I don't know, maybe we're out with family or friends, and the first thing we do, instead of observing and taking in a moment, is to grab our phones and take a picture, is to try and capture the moment, and we end up viewing the world. You see this most acutely, I suggest, at sort of at rock concerts or concerts of any different description, but where instead of watching the band, taking the music, doing that, we've got our phones up in the air, desperately trying to record what's going on. And yes, we can remember, but actually maybe we've missed something in that process. We haven't intentionally interrupted our lives to be present, to stop, to pause, to pray, to be present in a situation. And I wonder if that's something that we should be considering and thinking about, particularly as we think through Lent, but particularly as we think through this situation with Ukraine. I wonder, when was the last time you intentionally interrupted yourself? Where you stopped to look at the world around you? Where you stopped and paused and allowed yourself to be, to soak it in? Maybe if you're one of those people who walks with earphones, when was the last time you paused and let your earphones, you let your ears hear the natural world? Let your ears hear everything that's going on around you. Take in the sounds. Or maybe when you've been with family and friends or people just in community, when have we last stopped and gone, I'm thankful, I'm taking in this moment because it's wonderful to be here right now. I'm intentionally interrupting myself. I'm giving thanks to God. I'm recognizing the moment and I'm recognizing my place in the world. When was the last time we did that? Isn't it so easy that we slip back into our normal patterns post-lockdown with the privilege of interacting with other people? Just imagine if we did that, how much it could transform our lives. And so with this idea of intentional interruption, I think that it's vital that actually we grab hold of it for Lent, but also for other stages of our lives. Perhaps one way of intentionally interrupting yourself is to set an alarm each day to pray for Ukraine, to intentionally interrupt yourself, to pause what you're doing, to set an alarm on your phone and have a short moment of prayer to remember the people of Ukraine and the situation there and pray for peace both there and around the world. Maybe you want to intentionally interrupt yourself by picking up a Lent book or a resource that takes you deeper in your Christian journey, something that it goes through the process. Maybe you want to intentionally interrupt yourself by choosing to give something up so you can remember the sacrifice of Jesus every time you think, I really want a chocolate bar, but I'm not going to get one because I'm remembering God's sacrifice for me. Or maybe you want to intentionally interrupt yourself by taking up acts of generosity, where over these 40 days and 40 nights, you decide to be generous, to act with kindness each and every day, and set yourself a challenge around what to do each day as an act of generosity and an act of kindness. It was interesting to me when I was thinking about this, that we are journeying towards the cross, that we're journeying and we're contemplating the cross. And as I thought about these acts of solidarity, these acts of sacrifice, these acts of generosity, I was drawn to a quote by Bishop Graham Tomlin. It says this, and I'll read it to you. It says, "The path laid out by the cross, where each person looks out for the interests of others, is in fact ultimately a vision of community, not of individual achievement. This is the way human society was meant to work." We are focusing and journeying towards the cross, a moment of community, a vision for community where people are looking out for the interests of others. Maybe as we intentionally interrupt ourselves, we can be taking that on board with acts of generosity, acts of sacrifice, acts of prayer and intercession. Maybe as the people of God, we could take that on. Because imagine if we do that. Imagine the difference that would happen. Imagine the ripples that would reach out around our communities and around our country and around the world as the people of God intentionally interrupt themselves for a vision of personal development that leads to a greater vision of community. So this Lent, with all the complications of the world, I encourage you, intentionally interrupt yourself. Journey with God. God bless.